After nearly 1,000 years asleep and imprisoned in a coffin, Rai, the most powerful noble who ever lived, finally awakens. Upon waking, he realizes how much the world has changed during his slumber. Everything is different now in modern Japan. Humanity has evolved greatly, and the dominance of his people, the nobles, has virtually disappeared. Before, these powerful beings known as nobles held positions of power and in ancient times were revered by humans, treated as rulers and even gods. But that was about 820 years ago. Rai tries his best to recreate at least a small fraction of what he remembers from his time, to remain faithful to his heritage. But while doing so, he must try to be a normal high school student, even though he is the most powerful being that ever existed. At the same time, he is pursued by a criminal group that despises the power and fame of the nobles before humanity. It all starts on a small boat, with a group of men from the Union who find a coffin in the middle of nowhere, and take it to an abandoned warehouse. They try to open the coffin for several hours, but no matter what they do, it won't open. So they all leave it there overnight, and say they'll try again the next day. However, that same night, when the full moon rises, Rai, the most powerful of his kind, suddenly wakes up. The next day, Rai immediately sets out in search of his assistant, Frankenstein, who is the director of a school at the time. But upon arriving, Rai encounters another student, a boy named Chinwoo, who is late and is not allowed to enter. He greets Rai and wonders how he has never seen a student with that appearance before. While wondering who he is, the gates open and the boy magically disappears. Rai goes straight to the principal's office, as he can sense where his assistant Frank is in the building. While Rai was outside about to knock, Frankenstein already sensed his presence and immediately opened the door, kneeling to welcome him, calling Rai his master and welcoming him back to the world of the living. Frankenstein then told Rai that 820 years had passed, and that he had waited patiently for his return. Rai asked Frank what century they were living in, and Frank replied that it was the 21st century, and that due to Rai's long sleep, he felt the need to catch up on the modern era. He then asked Frankenstein if he could study there. Later, Rai goes to class where the teacher welcomes him and introduces him to the rest of the class. Rai then introduces himself by his full name, Cad, a trauma from Rizal. After the introduction, Shuno shouts that this is the boy he saw earlier, but who mysteriously disappeared. The teacher tells Shuno that Rai will sit next to him, since Shuno had known him since the beginning of classes, but this causes all the girls to look at Shuno with jealousy. Meanwhile, two men from the organization called Union return to the abandoned warehouse and discover that the coffin has been taken. These two men are known as M21 and M24 and were responsible for taking the coffin. However, when they arrive, it is no longer there, and both are furious with the watchman who was taking care of the coffin. They think the man is lying about the whereabouts of the coffin, but decide to check if he is telling the truth. M24 bites the man's neck, revealing parts of the watchman's memories. Inside his mind, he can see a female witness in his memory and uses this to track her down and find the woman in order to get the answers they were looking for. After being bitten by M24, the watchman turns into a kind of monster who now works for the organization. Back at school, Rai is in the cafeteria with Xingwu, surrounded by girls who stare at him. Xingwu is surprised to find out that Rai doesn't know what ramen is and has never heard of this popular Japanese dish. Xingwu helps him understand everything and even try the food. Rai thinks it's poison or a trap, but after tasting it, ramen becomes his favorite dish. On the way home, Rai walks with Xingwu when they hear screams coming from under the highway. We see a student named Yana being attacked by the monster bitten by M24. The monster had tracked Yana because she was a witness in the dreams before the coffin was taken. So Xingwu ran towards the monster like a complete maniac and gave it a flying kick to the face like Bruce Lee, knocking it to the ground and saving his friend Yana. At that moment, the others saw the monster get up and were frightened, quickly running away. However, Rai didn't care about the monster and remained completely motionless. His eyes began to glow red, and he sensed something around the corner. It was 21 and 24 who were hiding. Then they both realized that there was something different about Rai, as he didn't seem like an ordinary guy, and they had no idea that he was the one who had come out of the coffin they were looking for. After escaping, they found a safe place in the park, and then 21 and 24 were seen in the alley with the monster they had created. They decided that following Yana was still the best option, as she was the only one who had witnessed what had happened and what had come out of the coffin that night. During the conversation, we discovered that the two work with others in an organization called the Union, which carries out suspicious activities such as experiments on humans to try to create people with powers just like 21 and 24. As a result, 24 is now a kind of vampire with super strength, and 21 is a demonic werewolf. Here we meet two other people from the shadowy organizational group named Jake and Mary, who are superior to 21 and 24. They tell them that they need to find the coffin as soon as possible, otherwise they will be eliminated, as they are just subordinates created by the organization and treated as useless scum. We see a flashback at the organization's headquarters, where 21 and 24 were created and given orders to recover the coffin, as Jake knew that a powerful noble was inside it. But after discovering the power contained in the coffin, 21 and 24 plan to absorb it and use it against the organization, as revenge for what they did to them and others in the laboratory, where they were treated like mere lab rats. After a few days searching for the coffin, 21 and 24 see Rai and his colleagues again. While watching from the tallest building in the city, 21 is surprised to see Rai staring at them from the ground, and their eyes meet. At that moment, their other colleagues Jake and Mary arrive at the top of the building, and Jake devises a plan to eliminate Shinwoo and his classmates, as they are the only witnesses to what happens in the organization and no one but the internal members can know about the existence of these monsters and experiments. On their way home, Shinwoo and his friends are approached by the organization, and at that moment Jake appears. They are also attacked by 21. Jake is impressed by 21's fighting skills, but 21 reveals that one of his classmates is still missing and that he is the one they need to capture most urgently. While Rai was talking to his assistant Frank received a call from Shinwoo's number, but the message was from Jake, who had captured his students in the warehouse. The monster was about to devour his colleagues, but Shinwoo got up in time to save them and they fled. Rai and Frankenstein set out in search of Shinwoo and the others. Although the message was unclear, Frankenstein knew something was wrong and needed to find them before something happened to his students. During Rai and Frank's flight, we see Shinwoo, Ikon and Yuna running to the elevator. Jake, furious, kills the monster created by 24, considering it useless, and decides to resolve the situation on his own. Upon reaching the elevator, Jake grabs Shinwoo and the two begin to fight. Jake, being a highly modified human with special abilities, manages to defend himself. Shinwoo didn't stand a chance, as he was just an ordinary student, but he still tried his best to defeat Jake alone. Meanwhile, 24 watched from the background as Shinwoo begged Jake not to hurt his friends and said he wouldn't allow it. 24 heard everything and remembered what Jake had done to him and his friends at the organization's headquarters. Unable to stand by and watch Jake do that again, 24 stepped forward and delivered a stunning punch to Jake's chin, officially becoming a renegade agent. 21 noticed immediately, as they were connected by the same signal using an earpiece, and upon hearing what 24 had done, attacked 21, starting an intense fight. At that moment, Jake got up and instantly attacked 24. Despite being weaker, 24 managed to grab him and blew himself up. Meanwhile, 21 is still fighting Mary, being completely useless against her. Mary in turn performs several insane blows and dominates him, calling him a stupid little mother and insulting his friend 24, calling them both failed experiments and ugly useless orphans. After humiliating 21, she was about to finish him off. However, Frankenstein suddenly appears and grabs Mary in time, followed closely by Rai. After 21 sees Rai again, he feels a strange sensation and realizes that something is different about him. Frankenstein then asks Mary where the students are, but Mary says they can't save them because Jake has captured them and it's too late. But at that very moment, 21 thinks that Rai might be able to save 24 if he gets there in time. So he reveals the location to Rai and tells Frank and Rai to leave because he wants to face Mary again. But Rai does not allow 21 to fight, as he knows that 21 will lose, and instead orders Frank to take care of Mary and 21 to guide him to the location of Shinwoo and the others. A few minutes after the explosion, Jake gets up, but 24 is nowhere to be found. At that moment, Jake confronts Shinwoo again, calling him a weak and disgusting mortal human and saying that he loves killing human trash like him. But just as Jake was about to finish off the crowd, Rai arrived, and Jake remembered the last student who wasn't present when they found Shinwoo. Suddenly, 21 screamed and attacked Jake with all his might. But once again, Jake was much stronger, so 21 was defeated by his opponent. At that moment, the scene shifts to Mary and Frankenstein, and we see Mary witnessing Frank's strength. And for the first time in years, she is forced to transform into her true form due to Frank's strength and noble powers, which shocked the enemy. After seeing Mary's true form, Frankenstein begins to doubt his victory. However, at that moment, Rai gave Frankenstein permission to break his seal for the first time. This unlocked his full potential as a noble, and we saw him gain an immense amount of power. Mary was immediately afraid of him and couldn't believe what was happening. After that, Frankenstein provoked Mary, saying that the entire organization began with the nobles because they were just trying to copy what the nobles did, wanting to become gods like them. But Frank said that they are just ordinary pathetic humans with the powers of lab rats and that they could never rule humans because they only have evil intentions. Then he suddenly attacks with a burst of super energy that destroys the entire building and shatters the surrounding windows. And Mary can't do anything. Meanwhile, Jake defeats M21, who is too weak to continue fighting. That leaves only Rai as the last survivor. Jake approaches Rai and thinks he is terrified, since Rai doesn't even look him in the eye. And Jake laughs at the fear he feels. Jake continues to laugh and mock Rai, cursing him and ordering him to kneel. However, Rai doesn't say a word and uses his superhuman abilities to make Jake kneel before him as if he were his mere extra. And Rai didn't even have to lay a finger on him. Witnessing this power, M21 is shocked and realizes that he must be the one the organization has been talking about all along, and that he must be the hidden power in the coffin known as Noble Ace. After humiliating Jake in front of everyone, he tries to get up again, but with each attempt, Rai smashes his head against the floor with his mind control. Then Shine Wu tries to call Rai, warning him to be careful, but Rai doesn't want them to know who he really is and what he is capable of, so he puts them to sleep with his mind control. And at that moment, Jake finally transforms into his lab rat form, and we see the monster hidden inside him for the first time. Jake transforms into a gigantic demonic beast with enormous strength, a being created to deal with serious problems like Rai. However, even after this transformation, Jake still can't even touch Rai, who forces him to kneel again. Even in his demonic form, Jake tries one last time, gathering all his strength to deliver a powerful blow to Rai. But Rai simply blocks the blow a few inches from his face, and Jake still can't physically harm him, no matter how powerful he becomes. After witnessing Jake's attempts to kill Rai, Rai decides to take matters into his own hands and threatens to pay for all his sins with his own blood. At that moment, Rai destroys Jake, blowing him up into billions of pieces, and the entire building is bathed in red blood. Rai is completely erased from the universe, as if he had never existed. Meanwhile, in a remote location, an army of armed men was attacked by a group called Da Cinco, belonging to the organization known as the Union Organization. The members of Da Cinco, Ta, Tak, Sharkhammer, and their leader Kranz, easily annihilated all enemy armed forces using their superhuman strength, and managed to capture a renowned scientist. With their mission accomplished, Da Cinco decided to head to Japan to fulfill their next task in the service of the Union. Meanwhile, somewhere in Japan, two high school students, Shinu, also known as Tashiro, and his best friend Ikana, or Manabu, return to school. They are greeted by a group of girls surrounding the newly hired school security guard, M21. From afar, our protagonist Rai is reassured by his servant Frankenstein, also known as Frank, that Tashiro's memory has been erased, as Tashiro knew that M21 was a superhuman. The night before, M21 got a job as a security guard because he was part of the Union, but they were after him and his friend M24 because they both had special powers, and the Union considered them failed experiments. Therefore, M21 had to keep a low profile. Now in the present day, Frank, who is also the school principal, allows his master Rai to pretend to be a high school student, even though he is the most noble. Rai wants to catch up on the technological advances of the last 820 years. Upon entering the classroom, Rai quickly befriends Tashiro and draws a cat face on his cell phone. During lunch, Rai is amazed by smartphones, watching students taking pictures and chatting from a distance. At recess, Rai talks to Frank and M21, expressing his desire to have a cell phone like everyone else. The next day, Tashiro and Manabu are surprised to see Rai with a newer and better smartphone. During lunch, a big guy in a fancy car shows up and starts picking fights with students in the sports area, looking for Tashiro. When they hear the noise, Tashiro, Rai, Manabu, and other students rush over. M21, watching from a distance, hesitates to get involved because he needs to keep a low profile. After a while, an older janitor tries to intervene, but the big guy gets angry and prepares to throw a punch. Toshiro jumps in to protect the janitor, using his bandage to block the punch. The big guy recognizes Toshiro and says he was looking for him, claiming that Toshiro hit on his girlfriend. Toshiro keeps trying to explain that his girlfriend misunderstood, but the big guy is determined to beat him up. With no other option, Toshiro had to fight back, and the big guy landed a few punches before Toshiro managed to land a hook. When the situation started to escalate, Raitu had to intervene and get M21 to take the initiative. M21 quickly appeared in front of the big guy and easily subdued him. Frightened, the big guy told his friends to back off, hastily reversing his sports car to get away. Later that day, Frank apologized to M21 for unintentionally putting him in the spotlight, as his goal was to go unnoticed. Meanwhile in Japan, DA5, the group of attackers from earlier was in a skyscraper, analyzing the surroundings before putting their plans into action. The next day, as M21 was about to close the school gates, two white-haired students approached him. They asked M21 to take them to Frank, the principal. Realizing that they were nobles, Frank tried to act like a normal human and enrolled them in high school. However, he warned Rai about the new students, Regis and Sarah. Upon entering their new classroom, Regis wet his pants when he sensed Rai's demonic aura, so he decided to stay with him a little longer. In the cafeteria, Regis found Rai intriguing. Toshiro realized that Manabu was in love with Sarah and shared his plan with Rai to bring them together. Meanwhile, Frank and M21 returned to the house by car. On the way, M21 asks Frank about the nobles, powerful beings sought after by the Union. Unlike the Union, which used scientific methods to extract power from humans, the nobles possessed innate strength. Frank adds that many centuries ago, the nobles emerged at a time of extreme need for humanity, and they dedicated themselves to protecting the human race, as they were comparatively strong and possessed unique power. For this reason, Frank speculates that Regis avoided fighting him because they considered him an ordinary human. M21 mocks the ideology of the nobles, but Frank assures him that some nobles have a different line of thinking. They believe that with the progress of society, humans no longer need a superior race to protect them. M21 asks if Rai and Frank were the noblest. Frank ambiguously replies that he was both right and wrong at the same time. Upon arriving home, Frank is disappointed to find Regis, Sarah, and Rai, along with his friend, clowning around the house. Unable to hide his emotions, he runs to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Seeing that M21 was living with Frank, Toshiro suggests that Frank also let Regis and Sarah stay at his house. Back in the kitchen, Frank apologizes to M21 for bringing more company when he wanted to go unnoticed. M21 humbly thanks Frank for everything he has done and offers to help wash the dishes. Sarah enters the room to offer help, but Frank assures her that everything is under control. As she leaves, Sarah notices the number 21 tattooed on M21's hand. The next day, she informs Regis about the tattoo and speculates that M21 was a subject of the Syndicate's experiments, since the Syndicate numbered its subjects. Believing that the disappearance of the noble's coffin was linked to the sudden appearance of M21, Regis decides to follow him. Confronting M21, Regis questions him about what he knows regarding the events surrounding the coffin's disappearance. M21 attempts to lie about his involvement, but Regis does not believe his lies and presses him to reveal those responsible for the coffin's disappearance. Believing that Regis was unaware that the noble had already been freed, M21 tries to provide insufficient information. Fed up with the situation, Regis decides to use mind control, but M21 avoids him and turns his hands into claws. While they fight, Sarah informs Regis about her difficult situation. Shortly before, Toshiro, Manabu, Rai, and Sarah were returning home. Toshiro tried to bring Manabu closer to Sarah, but was surprised by a group of strange men. They demanded that Toshiro obey their orders while threatening Rai with a knife. Upon hearing this, Regis and M21 head to Toshiro and find him fighting a crowd. Regis tries to intervene, but M21 stops him, informing him that Sarah is safe. Furthermore, he tells Regis that humans are no longer as weak as they used to be. When the leader of the crowd draws a gun, M21 protects Toshiro. The defeated crowd leaves Toshiro and his friends alone. Upon returning home that night, M21 informs Regis that humans do not need the leadership of the nobles and are now more independent than they were centuries ago. Although there is still some friction between them, Regis and M21 make peace. Furthermore, still believing Frank to be an ordinary human, Regis uses mind control to make him forget the conversation he had with M21. To make Regis believe it worked, Frank pretends to be under mind control. Regis also uses his powers on Rai, but is unsure if they work due to Rai's expressionless personality. Elsewhere, the Union's DA5 is investigating the coffin's disappearance. According to DA5, the event was ironically covered up by the police as a psychotic rage attack, although it was clearly caused by people with superpowers. Furthermore, since Jack and Marie, the superior model of superhumans, were sent to investigate the coffin before them, it is assumed that Jack and Marie are still searching for the missing coffin, as they have not reported anything about an infected M21 created by an M24. Furthermore, after finding nothing about the current whereabouts of M21 and M24, it is assumed that both are alive, and they begin to search for them. Meanwhile, back at school, Manabu scolds Toshiro for getting into fights often and begins to become attached to Regis, leading Toshiro to believe that he has a crush on men instead of women. At Manabu's house, he, a computer nerd, is tasked by his uncle who works for the police with performing security checks on the department's server. During the check, Manabu encounters Tal from DA5, who was trying to hack into the server. Gradually, the two begin to respect each other, as they had never met anyone as nerdy as themselves, and compete with each other by exchanging attacks on the server. During the intense battle, the distracted Toshiro ruins the fun by accidentally tripping over the laptop's battery cable, causing Manabu's computer to shut down. Manabu scolds Toshiro for not using his brain, and leaves the room to report the attack to his uncle. With Manabu out of the room, Toshiro takes control of the laptop, and starts reading the conversations. Tal, impressed by Manabu's skills, starts chatting with him, unaware that Toshiro is now behind the laptop. Toshiro becomes suspicious when Tal reveals that he is 24 years old, which reinforces the suspicion that Manabu liked men, including older ones. While Toshiro was chatting, Manabu sneaked up with a cold and merciless look, causing Toshiro to gulp in fear and beg for mercy. Meanwhile, Tal, realizing that Manabu was indifferent, informed Krantz, the leader of DA5, of M21's whereabouts, as he had located him by hacking into the city's communication system. After hearing the report, Krantz orders Hammer and Shark to arrest M21 using all possible techniques to capture him alive. Meanwhile, at Frank's house, M21 and Regis continue to argue. And after a while, when M21 is about to open up about his past to Regis, Frank interrupts him and he finally loses his patience. He orders Regis and M21 to clean up all the packaging they threw on the floor. Regis, being the annoying brat that he is, orders Frank to make Rai participate in the cleanup as well. Frank, hesitant to ask his master to clean up, begins to divert the conversation to Sarah, but Regis again brings the subject back to Rai. Irritated by Regis's shouting, Rai, expressionless, gets up and begins to help Regis clean up the mess. The next day, Frank gives M21 a fake bank account that cannot be traced by the syndicate, and deposits his first salary into that account. The following day, on his way somewhere, M21 encounters Shark and Hammer, who immediately begin to argue. Soon after, a battle begins, ending in a completely one-sided manner, as Shark demonstrates great skill and ease in overcoming M21. After a while, the fight is interrupted when Regis and Sarah find M21 completely injured. Provoked by Regis's insults, Shark launches a powerful attack against Regis, which is blocked by M21, who stands in front of Regis and absorbs the blow. Shortly thereafter, Krantz intervenes and reprimands Shark for going too far with M21, even though he was instructed to bring him back alive. To protect Regis and Sarah, and also to find out information about his former comrades, M21 agrees to join DA5, pretending to be a Union member, since DA5 still considered him a Union agent. Regis also believes M21's charade as a Union agent and becomes furious, feeling betrayed by him. Meanwhile, Manabu checks the security of the police servers again and this time returns prepared to neutralize Tal's invasion. As expected, Tal reappears and sends a series of viruses to Manabu's device, taking him by surprise. Impressed by Manabu's attack, Tal tracks his data, discovers his whereabouts and decides to visit him soon to befriend him. Back at Frank's mansion, Regis and Sarah inform Frank about M21's betrayal, leaving Frank worried that M21 will leak Hype's information to the syndicate after joining them. Somewhere isolated, DA5 members detain and torture M21 in an attempt to obtain information about his mission to recover the coffin, and also about Jake and Marie. As M21 does not give in, DA5 decides to leave him for now so he can think. Before leaving, Takeo takes pity on M21's situation and offers him water, which surprises M21 and the other DA5 members. After drinking the water, M21, using DA5's false knowledge that he is still an agent of the syndicate, agrees to cooperate and promises to reveal information only if the members of DA5 reveal to him the data about his fellow failed experiments like himself. After accepting the deal, M21 takes advantage of being the only lead in the case and bargains for food. Krantz asks Hammer to share his fake, greasy McDonald's sandwiches, but M21 demands a bowl of ramen instead. Taking a break, Tao praises Takeo's humane behavior within their group. as he was the only one who sympathized with M21, but Takeo explains that his kindness is a result of his memories with his sister. At school, Manabu wonders about M21's sudden disappearance and questions Rages about her. Seeing that Rages was angry for some reason, Manabu plans to throw a party at Frank's mansion. Shortly after, Manabu receives a message from Tao asking to meet in person the next day, so the next day he leaves Toshiro alone with Sarah to buy items for the party. The next day, while Toshiro is carrying the items, he sees Takeo being beaten up in an alley and goes after the attackers. Elsewhere, Manabu meets Tao and is initially defensive, as Tao was an outlaw hacker who had hacked into the police department, but soon they get excited about their shared interest in hacking. Manabu discovers that he and Tao are very similar, as they are surrounded by people who do not understand their shared hobby. As a sign of respect, Manabu calls Tao his older brother, which makes Tao happy. After rescuing him from the alley, Takeo thanks Toshiro for helping him and mistakes him for Sarah, thinking they are a couple. Rushing to get to the mansion in time for the party, Toshiro and Sarah say goodbye to Takeo, who remembers his younger sister who was also the same age as them. Later, to understand what it means to be an older brother, Tao offers to help Takeo in his search for his sister, who has been detained by the syndicate. After a long pause, Shark threatens to kill M21 if he remains silent during the interrogation once again, but Takeo reminds Shark that M21 was his only source of information, rebuking his indulgent nature. Shark reveals that he killed all the women and children that Takeo spared in previous missions. Upon hearing this, Takeo becomes enraged and points his gun at Shark, but Takeo stops him. Shark asks him to put aside his mercy, as the organization had a rule to kill any possible informants. Later that day at school, Regis notices Shark watching him from afar. Shark, realizing that Regis had already seen him, decides to use him as a pawn to obtain information from M21. Later, Regis encounters Shark and Hammer, and a battle ensues. Regis easily overpowers Shark, so Hammer throws bombs to protect him. He then throws Shark a pill called D, which makes him even stronger. Now able to keep up with him, Regis decides to use his powers to their full potential and impales Shark. Before delivering the final blow to Shark, Regis stops, as Hammer threatens to kill Manabu and Toshiro if he does not obey their orders. Back at the base, Shark finds the other members of DA5 at M21 and reveals their new prisoners. At Frank's mansion, Sarah rushes out after sensing that her mental connection with Regis has been destroyed, meaning that Regis is either unconscious or dead. Believing that Manabu and Toshiro were also in danger, Hai and Frank follow Sarah. Unconscious, Regis finally wakes up and finds himself handcuffed and surrounded by DA5 members. Believing that Regis knew about the coffin, Shark tries to find out his relationship with M21. To save Regis, M21 lies about the relationship between them. Toshiro and Manabu also wake up and realize that they had encountered some of the members before. Toshiro is surprised to see Takeo, while Tal is ridiculed by Shark after Manabu calls him his older brother. However, neither of them expected to find school guard M21 among the members. M21 ignores Manabu's pleas for an explanation, so Shark tests M21's conviction by threatening to beat Toshiro to death. Before anything can happen, Tal intervenes and Takeo suggests that they release the new prisoners after using a drug to erase their memories. However, Kranz supports Shark's decision to kill them, as any potential risks were unacceptable. As Shark moves to impale Manabu, Toshiro tries to stop him, realizing that M21's humanity had disappeared. Regis takes matters into his own hands and protects Manabu. Shark then knocks Regis to the ground and lifts him up to deliver a series of punches to his face. To protect Regis, Toshiro rushes to punch Shark. Meanwhile, returning with the entire KFC menu, Hammer finds Sarah on her way to the interrogation room. Hammer throws bombs at her, but Sarah cuts through his body. He then throws another set of bombs, but Sarah quickly defeats him. Upon receiving the punch, Shark lets go of Regis so he can deal with Toshiro. Taco protests Shark's actions, but Krantz orders him to investigate the attacks on the upper floors of the building. M21 tries to free Toshiro and the other students by agreeing to reveal information, but Krantz refuses to leave witnesses behind. Shark then lifts Toshiro by the neck to strangle him to death. Meanwhile, M21 begins to question his decision. M21 was very close to fulfilling his promise to M24 by finding other failed experiments. But now he found himself in a dilemma. Nanabu rushes to help, but is thrown away by Shark. Realizing that he was discarding his morality, M21 decides to help Toshiro by attacking Shark's arm with his claws. On the roof of the building, Hai and Frank land and find Taco in front of them. Frank suggests that Hai help his friends while he deals with Taco. Frank attacks Taco, who blocks the attack using a black box. Tako then starts shooting at Frank with a huge rifle. Frank dodges the shots and approaches only to realize that Tako also had a pistol at his disposal. Frank saves himself time, so Tako decides to use the D pill to speed things up. On another floor, Sarah finds Hammer again, who had survived the previous attack and was now under the effect of the D pill. Meanwhile, Mem-21 continues to attack Shark, who pushes him away. To protect the students, M21 puts himself in front of Shark's attack, causing him to fall to the ground. Realizing that M21 was now on his side, Regis breaks his handcuffs and throws Shark away. Shark then uses the D pill to strengthen himself, but Regis still manages to corner him. Before Regis could decapitate him, Kran saves Shark and uses the D pill himself. Mistakenly thinking that Kranz was trying to help him, Shark is shocked to find himself impaled by Kranz, who reveals his motive for absorbing the other members using the pill. After reducing Shark to skin and bones, Kranz throws him away and easily repels all of Regis's advances. He then punches Regis, but decides to spare him, as Regis had information about the coffin. Seeing Regis's condition, M21 tries to help, but bleeds due to his previous cut. With little to no hope, M21 finds Rai nearby, entering the room with his target Kranz in sight. Rai becomes furious and offended after Kranz speaks without permission in his presence. He forces Kranz to the ground using mind control. Meanwhile, Takeo points his pistol at Frank and burns his clothes. Takeo tries to finish Frank off quickly, as he needs to deal with Rai next. Hearing this, Frank unleashes his sealed powers to protect his master. At the same time, Sarah summons her only weapon known as Death Vision. She decapitates Hammer and leaves only to see a spectacular battle taking place on the roof. On the roof, Takeo tries to dodge Frank's spikes, but ends up getting caught. As Takeo prepares to accept his sealed fate, a glimpse of his sister's face forces him to fight for survival. Takeo then jumps and shoots Frank, almost hitting his face. Takeo falls to the ground and Frank moves in to finish him off. However, Sarah arrives on the roof and realizes that Frank was not an ordinary human. He was just pretending to be one. Similarly, Frank realizes that Sarah is a noble clan leader, as she possesses an exclusive weapon. Recognizing Sarah from before, Takeo asks her to protect Tashiro, just as he saved him in the alley earlier. Frank spares Takeo, instructing him to apologize to Tashiro after they clean up the interrogation room. Back in the interrogation room, Kranz resists Rai's mind control and tries to attack him. Rai alone blocks the attack and throws him against the wall. Kranz unleashes several blows at Rai, who deflects them using his barrier. Desperate, Kranz orders Tao to consume the deep hill, and Tao obeys, turning on Kranz against Manabu's protests. Kranz lifts him by the neck and demands that he hurry, but is taken by surprise when Tao breaks free from his grip and electrocutes him with a stun gun. Enraged by the betrayal, Kranz goes after Tao to finish him off. However, Rai paralyzes Kranz with his power, allowing Tao to escape. Hearing Manabu's pleas, Rai turns to him, reminding him that he would protect them anyway, as they are friends. Rai then gives a Nazi salute, which allows him to manipulate blood. Regis recognizes Rai's ability to fill himself with blood, which leaves him stunned by his absolute power. Rai considers it appropriate to eradicate Kranz with his own blood spilled in battle. Unable to keep up, Kranz is erased from existence, ending the fight once and for all. The next day, at Frank's mansion, Takeo wakes up from his unconsciousness to find M21 and bandages by his side. In another room, Frank notices Rai coughing up blood due to the exertion of the previous battle. Before he can help Rai tells him not to worry and that he should be ashamed of being selfish and breaking his seal without permission. Reminded that he broke his seal, Frank apologizes to Rai, as Rai had previously sealed his powers and he should not have used it without Rai's consent. Frank, prepared to accept any punishment from Rai, is surprised when Rai dismisses it, trusting that Frank was wise in his decisions and would not disobey him without reason. Hungry, Rai and Frank go to the dining table, where Tao is impressed with Sarah's cooking skills, but even more amazed by Frank's special ramen dish. On the mansion's balcony, M21 laments not being able to gather information about his fellow failed experiments, and begins to blame his weakness for the failure. However, Rai informs M21 that he had more potential and reveals his powerful true form. Overwhelmed by his own powers, M21 bows down to gather strength. In another room, Tao and Takeo decide to hide from the Union by hacking into its server and pretending to be dead. Concerned about his sister, Takeo is shocked when Tao informs him that she does not exist and that his memories of her were fabricated by the Union. Feeling like a burden to Frank, Tao decides to leave with Takeo the next day. Upon leaving, Tao also informs M21 that he tried to obtain information about other failed experiments, but all records had already been destroyed. M21, sensing that the Union will continue to pursue them, convinces Frank to give them a place in the mansion. With Rai's agreement, Frank allows Takeo and Tao to stay at the mansion as well, turning it more into a shelter than a home. The next day, Toshiro and Manabu decide to resume high school after a long break and encounter an even larger group of perverted girls. As the handsome trio of two newly assigned guards, consisting of Tao and Takeo along with M21, has left them all drooling. In addition, all the girls go crazy when the king of Riz himself, Rai, enters the scene, which leaves Toshiro depressed since he has no luck with girls. During lunch break, as Toshiro was depressed about his unfair life without girls, Manabu asks Rai for help since he was the heartthrob of the school. Rai stutters out just one word, which causes all the girls around him to faint, which ends up having the opposite effect, as Toshiro becomes even more irritated and desperate. To help Toshiro in his desperate situation, Manabu asks him which girl he has a crush on, and unfortunately it turns out to be Sara, the only girl as beautiful and emotionless as Rai. With a critical situation at hand, Manabu gathers Takeo, Tao, M21 and Rai in a secluded place. To get help with Toshiro's love life, Manabu begs them to help him, since they have all been very successful with girls, and reveals that Toshiro had his eye on the most desirable girl, Sara. Knowing that getting Toshiro together with Sara was practically impossible, Tao, Takeo and M21 try to dodge the issue, but are forced to help, since Rai asks for their help. After many attempts, Toshiro is unable to connect with Tao, Takeo and M21, and with no other options he decides to visit Frank. In the principal's office, Toshiro asks Frank if he has ever had problems with girls, and to his surprise Frank replies that he has. As Frank begins to tell his story, Toshiro quickly realizes that Frank did indeed have problems with girls, but the problem was getting rid of the girls who pursued him all the time because he was extremely handsome. With few people to turn to, Toshiro decides to meet with Regis, since he was the only one who used to hang out with Sara all the time. Since Regis and Sara had a formal relationship, Regis is unable to help Toshiro, which leads M21 to call him useless for not being helpful. Regis and M21 quickly start arguing as usual, and as a result, Regis decides not to help Toshiro. Just as Regis is about to leave, Rai appears behind him and orders him to help Toshiro. After some time in the library, Regis, Tao, Takeo and M21 help Toshiro write a love letter, but it's all in vain, as Toshiro can't write a letter without being too formal or too weird. Annoyed, Toshiro throws away the paper he was writing on, which coincidentally lands near Rai's shoe. In an attempt to impress Sara, Toshiro devises a plan to impress her by showing off his basketball skills. To help Toshiro look cool, Tao, Takeo, M21 and Regis agree to play like rookies and let Toshiro get the upper hand. When the basketball game begins, Rai coincidentally gets the ball, and since he exudes a powerful aura, no one dares to get close to him. As Rai, oblivious to the rules of basketball, begins to take steps with the ball in his hand, he is forced to give up possession of the ball due to the traveling rule. The game resumes, and the ball, once again by coincidence, goes straight to Rai, who this time gracefully dodges and lets the ball fall into the hands of the opposing team. Regis, now with the ball in his hands, becomes selfish, strays from the plan, and enters into rivalry with M21. M21 and Regis begin to play against each other, trying to outdo each other by making more baskets. After a while, the ball goes to Rai, who regains possession. To help Toshiro, Rai passes the ball to him at high speed, making it pass through M21's block and allowing Toshiro to dominate it. With his only chance to show off to the girls on the court, Toshiro jumps for a dunk, but his one opportunity is ruined by Takeo, who also forgets his goal and steals the ball, scoring a basket for himself and winning over the girls. Desperate, Toshiro and Manabu sit on a bench outside where Toshiro decides to stop pursuing Sara, as he feels she has no feelings for him. Soon after, Sara and Regis approach from behind, and Sara reveals the love letter that Toshiro had discarded. Embarrassed, Toshiro asks if she read the letter. Sara, after confirming that she had, tells Toshiro to be himself, as he is much more charming when he is authentic with himself and others. As they were going to Frank's house, Sara hands Toshiro his backpack and smiles for the first time as they walk together to Frank's mansion. Upon arrival, Manabu and Toshiro find everyone sitting formally, waiting for them. Upon arrival, Frank reveals that Rai would rewrite their memories, since they knew who the nobles and superhumans were. Manabu and Toshiro are moved in protest, but finally agree after Frank reveals that rewriting their memories was necessary for their own safety, since the secret of the nobles and superhumans must remain secret. Rai assures Manabu and Toshiro that his feelings and relationship with them would not be affected. Rai writes their memories, making them forget that they are nobles and superhumans. The next day, Jejugol Kalandigar, the leader of the Landigar clan, visits the academy. All the nobles present sense Jejigol's presence and recognize Regis in Sarajevo, greeting him as Regis belongs to the Landdigger clan. Jejigol questions Regis's duties, as he was apparently wasting time interacting with modified humans. Before Regis can respond, the conversation is interrupted when Frank, who has a history with Jejigol, greets him at the gate and invites him to his mansion. Meanwhile, in the noble country of Lucadonia, the current lord of the nobles, Raskria, holds a meeting to inform the other noble clan leaders about Jejigol's departure for Japan. Some nobles point out that Regis and Sarah, who are in charge of recovering the safe, have been silent for some time. This leads them to believe that the silence is intentional, possibly due to collusion with the noble Rai, considered by many to be a traitor for allegedly betraying the previous lord, who was also the current lord Raskria's father. After the meeting, Karius believes that the speculation about Regis and Sarah is overly presumptuous, while Rajak still considers the possibility of betrayal. Rai is Rajak's younger brother. He hears Sarah's name in the conversation and interrupts it. Rajak, being the current leader of the Kesha clan, reminds his brother of his inferior status and ignores him. Meanwhile, at Frank's mansion, Jejigol meets Rai and reveals that as eternal sleep was synonymous with death, many believed Rai to be a traitor for abandoning the former lord to death, even though he was in eternal sleep, since many other noble clan leaders also entered eternal sleep with the former lord. The difference between the old and current nobles was enormous, as the gaps were desperately filled, leaving Lucadonia, the country of the nobles, quite vulnerable. To regain his lost strength, Jejigol invites Rai to return to Lucadonia, promising to prove his innocence if he accompanies him. Fond of humans, Rai decides to stay a little longer at his old school and asks Jejigol to wait a while. Meanwhile, Regis and Sarah explain everything about the clan leaders and the nobility to M21, such as Itaqueo, since they were superhumans and knew nothing about the nobles. Sarah reveals that she was the leader of the Lawyered clan. In addition, Regis reveals that Jejigol was his grandfather, which was evident from the similar strand of black hair among their white hair. Meanwhile, at Frank's mansion, as Rai would be staying for a while longer, Jejigol decides to stay at Frank's mansion, and instead of thanking him for his hospitality, Jejigol bluntly tells Frank that he does not trust him, as Frank was a killer of nobles 820 years ago and was involved in the massacre of hundreds of them. Remembering the past, Frank has a flashback of his brutal methods of killing nobles 820 years ago. As humans were despised by the nobles, Frank used to kill them in an attempt to make them feel the same as humans, which earned him the title of Noble Hunter. After the events of 820 years ago, in order to get rid of the noble hunter who had emerged, the former lord tasked Jejigol and Reger, the leader of the Kersha clan at the time, with capturing Frank alive. After receiving the lord's order on a quiet night, Jejigol and Reger, along with the Order of Knights, composed of noble agents, raided Frank's residence. Frank, knowing that his hideout was compromised, tried to escape, but was soon cornered by a cliff. With nowhere to run, Frank unleashed his powers and defeated the army of men instantly. As soon as Frank finished with the agents, Jejigol and Reger immediately followed him and prevented him from escaping. Frank, unwilling to cooperate, began to fight with Reger. After a while, Reger ordered Jejigol to step aside as he unsheathed Carter, his only weapon, a supernatural weapon that could be freely summoned by noble clan leaders and the Lord. Seeing Reger unsheath his weapon, Frank summoned clouds across the sky that began to produce purple electricity. The purple electricity struck Frank's hand and in an instant summoned the black spear, his weapon. Frank, after clashing swords with Reger, began to lose control of his body as the black spear corrupted his soul. Jejigol, realizing that the situation had worsened, decided to abandon his honor and join Reger, facing Frank in a 2-against-1 fight. To end the combat, Jejigol unsheathed his only weapon, and they all attacked simultaneously, causing a huge explosion. When the smoke from the explosion cleared, Frank had already disappeared, leaving traces of blood that revealed his fate. Bleeding from his stomach, Frank enters an abandoned and silent mansion, believing that no one would be inside. After a while, Frank is surprised to see a mysterious man in a dark room, looking out the window, unaware that it was Hayek and that he would soon become his master. Mistaking Hayek for another servant, Frank believes him to be the mansion's new butler. Jejigol and Reger inform Hayek of the Lord's request to see Frank. Hayek officially appoints Frank as his servant, surprising everyone by refusing the invitation from noble clan leaders. Meanwhile, Frank continues his intense training under Reger's supervision, but Jejigol remains adamant in his decision to arrest Frank for defaming Hayek. Frank, obedient to Hayek, goes to meet the Lord, but senses the noble's hatred when he arrives at the throne room. The Lord reveals Hayek's isolation and suggests a blood pact with Frank to prolong his life. Frank, hesitant to serve the nobles, remembers his 5 years with Hayek, The Lord considers Hayek essential for the protection of the nobility. However, Frank mocks the Lord's vision, suggesting the abolition of the system. Intrigued, the Lord leaves Hayek in Frank's care. After the meeting, the nobles comment on the Lord's suggestion of a blood pact between Hayek and Frank. Uruk-hai is visibly irritated. Later, while performing household chores, Frank invites Jejegul to a duel. Uruk-hai, enraged by Frank's acceptance of Hayek, challenges him to a duel. Frank controls his power, but Uruk-hai provokes him, causing Frank to manifest a demonic form. Hayek and the Lord arrive, and Hayek uses their blood to bring Frank back to consciousness. Frank, bandaged back at Hayek's mansion, decides to make a blood pact with Hayek. Both agree to the pact, and Frank swears allegiance. In the present, Jejegul regrets allowing the pact. He tries to convince Frank to bring Hayek back to Lucadonia to prove his innocence, but Frank refuses, highlighting Hayek's positive change. Jejegul realizes that Hayek is happy and leaves. Finding Regis and Sarah back in Lucadonia, Jejegul informs Raskria that Hayek's friends mistook him for someone else. Doubting his words, Raskria tries to read Jejegul's mind, which leads to his arrest. Hayek offers to rescue Sarah, and Raskria entrusts him with the task. Arriving in Japan, Rai rushes to Sara's school, jumping between buildings. He uses mind control to clear the sports field, alerting Sarah, Hedges, and Rai to the presence of a powerful noble. Sensing trouble, Dao, Takio, and M21 rush to the roof, finding Rai, who insults them by calling them humans. Ignoring Hedges' question, Rai describes his love for Sarah, revealing an old marriage proposal. Rai violently attacks M21 until Hedges and Sarah intervene. Sarah demands that Rai leave, and he reluctantly agrees, whispering a threat to Sarah before departing. Hedges questions the whisper, but M21 collapses from his injuries, requiring urgent attention. Rushing M21 to Frank, he is placed in a regenerative tank. Hedges explains that Rai's immense strength is due to pure Kersha blood. Sarah reveals that Rai proposed to her years ago. This resulted in his confinement for going mad after her rejection. Tao and Takio request experiments on Frank to increase his strength. At night, Sarah calms a worried Hedges on the balcony, surprising him with a comforting gesture. She advises him to sleep, sneaking out alone later to find Rai. Frank asks Rai for permission to deal with him, receiving approval when Rai removes the seal on his power. Meanwhile, Rai eagerly awaits Sarah, only to be rejected again. Enraged, he prepares to attack when Frank intervenes. A fierce battle ensues, revealing Rai's only weapon to Sarah's surprise. The fight intensifies, and Frank provokes Rai to use his full potential. Rai reveals the Lord's order, forcing Sarah to obey or face charges of treason. Hedges begs to accompany Sarah, but Rai refuses, citing the Lord's order. Taking Sarah to Lucadonia, Rai laughs, revealing Jejegul's desperate situation due to his lie. Helpless, Frank and Hedges return to the mansion, informing Rai about Sarah and Jejegul. After Rai decides to rescue them, Frank and Hedges prepare to go to Lucadonia. Meanwhile, at Raskria's palace, she anticipates the day when she will confront Rai, seeking revenge for her father's death. Sarah, accompanied by Rai, enters the throne room to be interrogated. At that moment, Raskria reveals that Jejegul is imprisoned on false charges. Seeking the truth, Raskria questions Sarah about an encounter with a supposed nobleman while mingling with humans. Unable to give a clear answer, Raskria tries to read Sarah's mind, causing her to scream in pain. Ryle defends Sarah, revealing that they only encountered modified humans and a strong blonde human. Raskria then orders Sarah's confinement for hesitating. Rai, Hedges, and Frank board a jet to Lucadonia to help Sarah and Jejegul. Frank reassures Hedges about the modified humans' preparedness, and they make a forced landing in the sea off Lucadonia, planning to reach Rai's mansion. The clan leaders discover Sarah and Jejegul's imprisonment and learn of the jet's crash. Lutiu suggests sending knights to investigate. In Lucadonia, Rai, Hedges, and Frank enter a forbidden forest near Rai's mansion. After a crash landing, they sense a mysterious aura and find the only weapon of the ancient Lord Ragnarok. Hedges stands guard while Rai investigates. Meanwhile, in disguise, Hedges confronts the approaching knights but is betrayed when his mask falls off. However, the modified humans rescue him, revealing that they have been secretly following him. Rai admits responsibility for Sarah and Jejegul's situation. Rai explains that he was accused of killing the former lord because he was not a noble, and 21 questions Rai's noble status. Frank explains Rai's unmatched power, surprising Hedges and the modified humans. Despite the rumors, they support Rai. Rai remembers the former lord predicting his future companion. Rai goes to the shrine to find Raskria. Studies informs Raskria of Hedge's betrayal, reinforcing her belief in Rai's support. She considers punishing Jejual with eternal sleep, but gives him a chance to explain himself. Raskria remembers her past jealousy of Rai revealed by Jejual. In the present, she demands Jejual's loyalty. Jejual admits to meeting Rai in Japan. Raskria spares him but removes him from leadership, preparing him for eternal sleep. Raskria tasks Rajak and Kallias with capturing Rai's group, blaming her for her father's death. Sara, upon learning of Jejual's fate, escapes from her cell in retaliation. Back in the forest of Lucadonia, Rai, Hedges and M21 head toward the Lord's palace, as they need to serve as bait so that Rai and Frank can reach the location more easily. As they advance, they are interrupted by Ryle, who lands in front of them. At the palace, Sara tries to reach Jejual, but is stopped by Raskria, the leader of the Eleanor clan, who blocks her. Raskria, reminding her that she is committing treason, orders her to return to her cell, but Sara refuses. Moments later, a battle between the two begins. Meanwhile, upon learning that his grandfather Jejual is being forced into eternal sleep, Hedges rushes to save Jejual, while M21 assures him that he can defeat Ryle. Tao and Takio, following behind them, also assure Hedges that they are capable of dealing with Ryle, as they have the T2 pill that Frank gave them. Without wasting a second, Hedges rushes to save Sara and Jejual, while Ryle becomes enraged when he starts bleeding, causing him to lose his mind and enter a state of fury. Back at the Lord's palace, Sara unsheathes her only weapon, the Scythe of Death, and Rosario's, in response, summons her only weapon, the Blood Witch, and the two engage in a fierce battle. From a distance, Carius and Rajak spot Hedges running toward the palace. To stop him, Carius holds Rajak back and decides that he himself will go in to stop Hedges. Meanwhile, in the battle between Ryle and the modified humans so that Takio's bullets hit Ryle, Tao orders M21 to lure Ryle closer to them. M21, a master in the art of provocation, incites Ryle to approach, which Ryle does, eventually falling into a trap that Tao and Takio had prepared. As Ryle approached, Takio's bullets began to emit high-voltage shocks implanted by Tao that electrocuted Ryle, making him even more furious. Upon freeing himself from the trap, Ryle summoned his only weapon, Grandius, in an attempt to eliminate the modified humans once and for all. Witnessing Grandius's invocation from a distance, Frank begins to worry about the modified humans and leaves, with the permission of his master Rai to protect them from Ryle. Meanwhile, Carius finds Hedges, and as they were on good terms, advises him to leave Lucadonia for the time being. Refusing to show cowardice, Hedges stands his ground and tells Carius that he will accompany JJ and Tao, no matter what happens. Seeing Hedges' conviction, Carius challenges him to get past him, saying that if Hedges can even scratch him, he will help him get to the Lord's palace. Carius attacks Hedges and suggests that he reconsider his decision. However, Hedges gets up with each blow, trying to fight back. Back to the fight between Ryle and the modified humans. Ryle, now with his only weapon, Grandius, manages to turn the tables while playing with M21, and easily dodges Takio and Tao's attacks. After playing with M21, Ryle prepares to play with Tao and Takio, but is stopped when M21 grabs his leg and calls him a false noble. Enraged, Ryle is one step away from ending M21's life, but is interrupted by his brother, Rajak, who appears and warns him about Frank, who has also appeared to protect the modified humans. Frank informs them that Hagar, the former leader of Kersha, was on equal footing with him. Realizing this, Rajak decides to take him seriously and summons his only weapon. Similarly, Frank summons his black spear and faces Rajak. Meanwhile, at her father's coffin, Haskria pays her respects and bows, promising to fight Rai relentlessly, as her father had made the mistake of trusting him. She orders Lute to destroy Jejudal until she arrives and telepathically summons the Rosaria. Back on the battlefield, Frank defends himself as Rajak advances with his speed. Rajak then creates several clones and advances toward Frank, who uses his spear to destroy them all. Seeing the modified humans cheering for Frank, Ryle strikes a blow toward them. Frank blocks Ryle's blow only to be surprised by Rajak. As a man of honor, Rajak also injures himself to keep the battle between him and Frank fair. Meanwhile, Rajas falls bleeding but Carius supports him, reminding him to keep his word. Rajas delivers a light punch to Carius's body, who is proud of his conviction. Back at his palace, Haskria condemns Sara to eternal sleep for protecting Jejudal. Jejudal once again pleads for Ryle and Sara's innocence, but Haskria does not listen to him. Jejudal reminds Haskria that condemning Rai would be impossible, since Frank, the only powerful human recognized by the Old Lord, was at his side. On the battlefield, Frank exhausts Rajak and wounds him. Seeing his brother lose, Ryle tries to give his soul weapon to Rajak so that he can fuse his own soul weapon with it, but Rajak rebukes him. Their father Ragar had split his own soul weapon and given Rajak and Ryle each piece, which was against the rules of nobility. Hearing Ryle want to fuse the pieces of the soul weapon, effectively undoing his father's wish, makes Rajak furious with Ryle. Meanwhile, in his sentence, Jejudul continues to point out Haskriya's lack of understanding of Frank and Rai's past. Calling her unfit to be a lady, Jejudul informs the current clan leaders of the true reason for Haskriya's hatred of Rai. Everyone is shocked to learn from Jejudul about the previous lord's suggestion to make Ryle the next lord instead of Haskriya, which would have caused Haskriya's hatred for Rai. Furthermore, Jejudul points out that Haskriya made no effort to find out the reasons for Rai's refusal to become the next lord. Disconcerted by his disparaging remarks about the lord, the other clan leaders respectfully ask Jejudul to be quiet. Haskriya summons Ragnarok and approaches Jejudul to put him into an eternal sleep. Suddenly, just as Haskriya is about to punish Jejudul and Sarah, Rai emerges from the main entrance to save him from punishment. As he approaches Haskriya, Rai is stopped by K-Ru, the leader of the Ru clan, who summons his spirit weapon Garen. K uses his most powerful attacks against Rai, but they have no effect, as Rai immediately after parrying the attack easily lifts him up and throws him away. Rai Zeria, the leader of the Lenore clan, quickly counterattacks by summoning her spirit weapon Blood Witch, which also proves useless as Rai easily deflects all her attacks. To protect the queen from the deflected projectile, Lut Asmurgas, leader of the Murgas clan, uses his spirit weapon Isenork to block the attack. Unable to defend herself from her own attacks, Ryer Zamurgus falls to the ground while Lut Asmurgus takes her place and uses Isenork on Rai to shrink him until he is crushed. Tired of the clan leader's futile attempts, Rai uses his mind control to force the leaders to fall to the ground due to the overwhelming power of his control. Sarah, surprised to see someone other than a lord controlling the minds of the clan leaders, asks about Rai's true power. Gadedel reveals that Rai was a noble, which meant he had power that surpassed that of the lords, and nobles like him were assigned to protect and punish the lords. Witnessing the clan leaders succumb to Rai's mind control, Rasara enters the battle and with her soul weapon Ragnarok, creates a whirlwind of blood with an immensely strong aura. Sensing the abnormally powerful aura of the Lord's weapon. From Frank and his men to the clan leaders, everyone stops fighting and rushes to the Lord's palace. Back at the palace, Rai, being the most noble, manages to parry Rasaraya's powerful attack and throws her onto the roof. Realizing that she was not using her full potential, Rai provokes her to use the Blood Field, an attack that only the most noble and noble lords could execute. Provoked into using the Blood Field, Rasaraya fights with all her might, but it is in vain as Rai once again nullifies her most powerful attack. Desperate, Rasaraya falls to the ground crying for having lost to him once again, since her father, the previous lord, had chosen Rai over her to succeed him. Seeing Rasaraya in such a vulnerable state, the clan leaders rise once again to protect her and defend her honor. Rai, realizing their conviction to protect Rasaraya, says that it is all useless, as they will continue to lose to him unless Rasaraya completely masters the Blood Field. Ignoring Rai's words, they all unite against him, which proves his words right as they are once again humiliated by Rai's absurd power. After a while bored with the fight, Rai decides to use the Blood Field against the clan leaders, beginning to accumulate blood from the ground and dyeing the air dark red. To protect the clan leaders, Rasaraya jumps in front of them and uses her Blood Field to nullify Rai's. After overusing the Blood Field, Rai and Rasaraya fall exhausted. To prevent Rai from crashing into the ground, Frank catches him, while Kahu grabs the falling Rasaraya. Together with Frank, Ryle, Rajek, and the superhumans who were fighting outside the palace, they enter and witness Rai using his hand to summon another Ragnarok. Surprised to see two Ragnaroks present, the other one begins to glow, causing Haskriya's Ragnarok to rise and project the residual thoughts of the Old Lord. The Old Lord reveals that he voluntarily chose to end his own life by entering into an eternal sleep. He adds that in order to evolve, he needed to entrust the future of Lucadoni to the next generation, and so, together with some of the clan's oldest leaders, he ended his own life. Jejudal being among those who came forward to take their own lives alongside the Lord. was sent back by the previous lord to watch over the future generation. After discovering the truth about Jeju-doll, the clan leaders ask why he did not tell them the truth. In response, Jeju-doll reveals that he held back after seeing how young successors were abruptly elevated to power to take the place of their predecessors. Furthermore, Jeju-doll reveals that as all the successors were confused by the sudden change in roles, someone took advantage of the situation and spread rumors that Rai was a traitor. Ashamed that he was unable to carry out the previous lord's order, Jeju-doll asks Haskrea to punish him for not being able to tell them the truth. Before Haskrea announces his punishment, Xarius throws Regis in front of Jeju-doll at Regis's request, who demands that Haskrea also be punished for belonging to Jeju-doll's clan. The clan leaders, realizing Regis's potential, ask Haskrea not to punish him, as he has the potential to lead the Landegger clan in the future. Hearing the thoughts of the clan leaders, Haskrea releases Jeju-doll and Sara, hugging and thanking Jeju-doll for always being by her side. Soon after, the spirit of the old lord disappears after apologizing to Haskrea for not informing her of his death. With the disappearance of the residues, the two Ragnaroks merge, forming a single powerful Ragnarok that Rai gives to Haskrea, since the Ragnarok was created for the nobles. The next day, after the superhumans recover, Frank obtains Haskrea's permission to take Regis and Sara back to Japan. Meanwhile, Rai meets Haskrea outside the palace, and she asks him how his father is doing. Rai, with fond memories of his father, tells her that he was always proud of her, which makes Haskrea laugh with happiness. After a while, Rai along with Frank, Regis, Sara, and the superhumans leave Lucadonia for Japan. Upon their arrival, everyone's routine returns to normal, and Tashiro and Manabu meet them, making them realize how much their lives have improved during their time in Japan with the humans.